tonight and see if I can record something on the big ditch. I hope it's working all right.
Again, we want to make this very comfortable and very casual. And if you need to take a break, you may take a break. If you want coffee and cookie, feel free to go get one cookie. And he's very used, he knows about the Red River crowd, so he knows that our bottoms get a little cranky if they sit too long. So he said this presentation will be about 30 minutes. So, Rush.
What Judy meant to say was, if any of you people need to go to the bathroom, you don't have to raise your hand.
Russ, they want to hear you.
I hate these things, but what I said was that what Judy really meant is that if anybody needs to go to the bathroom, you are the crankiest bunch of Well, I'm old too, but I'm not that cranky. Now, I hate to tell you, but you old folks are not going to be able to see that. So, put your glasses on, turn your hearing aids up.
What?
Tonight I'm going to talk about the Big Ditch, which is also known as the Elizabethtown Ditch and the Lynch Ditch. Now, I don't know how much any of you people know about the ditch. Some of you probably know more than I do. Some of you don't know anything about the ditch. So I'm going to present this as if you knew nothing about it, and that way I'll cover all the bases. The Big Ditch was built about 130 years ago. It was a water ditch designed to transfer water from the Red River watershed across the ridge into the Merino Valley to supply the gold fields around Elizabethtown. It was built high on the mountainside by hand in a little over a year's time, over 40 miles long. Today, much of the ditch remains in its original state. Now, much of it has been filled in by rock slides, much by dirt, humus, trees have grown up, but in many places the ditch is in its original size and condition. It had 3 miles of flumes, and of course most all the flumes have fallen, but a lot of the timbers are still present. And anyone who walks the high country will come across the ditch sooner or later. And once you find it, it's very easy to spot. Then you can walk miles in either direction on the ditch. Now, what I plan to do is to talk primarily about the history of the Big Ditch, how it came about, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the actual construction. And then when we get through, I'll show you some pictures of the ditch in its present condition and give you a flavor of where it is and how high it's located. Now, our story begins in the year 1866. This was 1 year following the end of the Civil War. At that time, if you recall, New Mexico was a territory of the United States. And it had only been about 20 years since it had been part of Mexico. The land was very sparsely settled. The two largest towns in New Mexico at that time were Santa Fe and Taos. There were very few roads, almost no communications. The territorial government was very crude, and the administration of the territory was carried out by the United States Army. In that year, 1866, a Ute Indian traveled to Fort Union out on the prairie east of Mora on the Santa Fe Trail. It was an Army fort on the Santa Fe Trail, and this Indian traveled to Fort Union to trade furs. And he carried with him some green rocks, which he had picked up thinking that they might be of some value. The settler of the fort was a man named William Moore, and when he spotted these rocks, he instantly recognized that they contained copper ore. So he inquired as to their origin and was told that the rocks had been picked up on the south slope of Baldy Mountain in the Moreno Valley. Well, Moore, together with two of his friends, formed what they call the Copper Company, made a claim in the area, in the Moreno Valley, and they hired 3 prospectors to go and search out the source of this copper ore. The prospectors were Larry Bronson, a man named Peter Kersinger, and the famous third man, R.P. Kelly. And so these men, in October of 1866, they left Fort Union, traveled across the prairie to where the present town of Cimarron is, came up the Cimarron Canyon, and entered the Moreno Valley at about the present site of Eagle Nest. And there they turned north up Willow Creek, which drains the south slope of Baldy Mountain. And the story is told that as 2 of the men set up camp and began to cook supper, one of them, Kelly, decided, just in order to have something to do, decided to pan the stream, which he did, and much to his surprise, he found gold in large quantities. Well, as you might imagine, the 3 men forgot all about copper, and they began to pan all the surrounding streams, gulches, sandbars, washes. And everywhere they looked, there was gold. Now, by this time, winter had come on, and a heavy snowstorm drove them out of the valley. They went back down the Cimarron Canyon, out on the prairie to Fort Union for the winter. They made a pact that they would keep this gold strike a secret, but as always happens, that didn't work out, and somehow the word leaked out. And so over the winter, the word of this great gold strike spread all over. And the following spring, in 1867, hundreds of prospectors and miners descended on the Moreno Valley. They came from everywhere. They came from some from New Mexico, Colorado, Texas, Kansas, everywhere. So that by the summer of 1867, there were over 1,000 men in the valley. And so at that time, it was decided to form a town site. And so the site was surveyed, and this was largely under the leadership of a John Moore. And it was decided to name the town after Moore's 4-year-old daughter named Elizabeth. And so Elizabethtown was founded and became the first incorporated town in New Mexico. And by the following year, it contained several thousand people and claimed to be the 3rd largest town in New Mexico behind Santa Fe and Taos. Now, at that time, all of the land was owned by Lucian Maxwell. Lucian Maxwell was from Illinois and had come to New Mexico as a young man. He was engaged in the fur trade originally. He became an Army scout and a great friend of Kit Carson. Settled in Taos, where he became a merchant. Maxwell had the great good fortune to marry wealth. And he married the daughter of Charles Beaubien. Beaubien was an American citizen who had settled in Taos early on, had become a leading merchant in Taos, and was one of the leading citizens. And in the early 1840s, Beaubien, along with a Mexican national named Guadalupe Miranda, these 2 men had been given the Beaubien-Miranda land grant by the Mexican. This was while New Mexico was still part of Mexico, and this was given by Governor Armijo. During the Mexican-American War, Miranda, who was a Mexican citizen, fled to Mexico and never came back, so that this land grant became under the sole ownership of Charles Beaubien. And Maxwell married Beaubien's daughter. When Charles Beaubien died, the Beaubien-Miranda land grant became solely owned by Lucian Maxwell and his wife. This was a huge land grant, the largest of all the Mexican land grants. It included all of what is now the Moreno Valley, from the far north end to south past Angel Fire. It included all of the Cimarron Canyon. It included all the land around Cimarron, all of what is now Philmont Scout Ranch, all of the land around Springer, and extended all the way to Raton and north into Mexico, into Colorado. Altogether nearly 2 million acres. In those days, if you had ridden a horse from the top of Bobcat Pass, down where Eagle Nest is, down the Cimarron Canyon, down past where Cimarron is, all the way to Raton, and to the top of the Raton Pass, you would never have left Maxwell land. The largest individually owned piece of property in the United States. When gold was discovered, Maxwell opened some mines on the east side of Baldy, at the headwaters of Ute Creek. He opened about 3 or 4 mines, and one of these mines, the Aztec mine, was very rich in gold, and Maxwell quickly became the richest man in New Mexico. On this side of Baldy, in the Moreno Valley, conditions were different, and it was impossible to do shaft mining or lode mining, and what was done, it was because of the sandy soil, what was done was placer mining and hydraulic mining. Placer mining simply meant to wash the sand with water, sort of like panning gold, but on a vast scale. So what they did was shovel the sand, mix it with water, run it down a long wooden trough called a sluice box. There were cleats in the bottom of the sluice box, riffles. The gold, being heavier than the sand, would settle out to the bottom. They would turn off the water and then collect the gold off the bottom. Now, there was a method which would increase the yield a great deal. What they did, they took metal plates, coated them with liquid mercury, put them in the bottom of the sluice box, and mercury forms an amalgam with gold, kind of a glob. They would run the sand and water through there, turn the water off, pull out the plates, take the amalgam off of the plates, and heat it. This vaporized the mercury, leaving the crude gold behind. They collected the mercury vapor in a condenser or a still, turned it back into liquid so they could use the mercury over and over and over again. And this increased the yield a great deal. Now, there was another method of mining over there called hydraulic mining, which was perfected largely by a man named Matthew Lynch. And that involved using high-pressure water hoses to wash the sand and wash it down into the sluice boxes. And now both of these methods, placer mining and hydraulic mining, require huge amounts of water. And those of you who have traveled from the Bobcat Pass to Eagle Nest and looked down at Moreno Creek realize that it's a very small creek and it doesn't produce much water, particularly in July and August. So with the influx of large numbers of miners and the attempts to do placer and hydraulic mining, it became quickly apparent that there just was not enough water available for all the miners. And many of them were unable to work their claims during the late summer. So people began to look around for alternate sources of water. Lucian Maxwell hired an Army engineer at Fort Union named Davis, N.S. Davis, captain, to search out alternate sources of water. And Davis came into he actually went all around the area, but he came into the Red River watershed and came up with the idea of collecting water in the Red River watershed, transferring it by a water ditch over into the Merino Valley to be able to supply the miners. The plan seemed feasible, so a company was organized called the Merino Water and Mining Company. There were 7 stockholders. Maxwell supplied the bulk of the money. They raised over $200,000, and in May of 1869, May the 12th, they began construction of this big ditch. Now you folks didn't give me enough hands to do all this stuff. You got it? Yeah. Now I don't know whether you can see this or not. Let me try and orient you a little. This is the town of Red River. This is the road that goes down to Cuesta. This is the road over the Bobcat Pass. This is the road that goes into the Upper Valley and the pavement ends up there at the junction of the Middle Fork and the East Forks of the Red River. This is the East Fork. This is the Middle Fork, West Fork. This is Sawmill Creek, Black Copper, Goose Creek. And this going up here is the old Red River Pass Road. Now, the ditch is shown in red. And the ditch began high in the West Fork at about 10,000 feet. Now, I don't know how familiar some of you are with the West Fork, but those of you who are and who know where Joe Boston's cabin is, the ditch begins about probably 150 yards west of Joe Boston's cabin on the southwest side of the stream. And there they put a head gate in place to divert water and then started the ditch around the rim of the canyon. The ditch, of course, stayed level on the contour, so it stayed up high on the ridge, whereas the stream and the canyon fell below. So the ditch worked its way out of the West Fork around into the Middle Fork Canyon and crossed the Middle Fork Creek somewhere around 200 or 300 yards below the Middle Fork Falls. And there another head gate was put in place. Then the ditch worked itself out of the Middle Fork Creek around the ridge and into the East Fork and crossed the East Fork, probably about a mile and a half from the trailhead. Another head gate was put in place. And then the ditch came out of the East Fork, crossed Sawmill Creek, and crossed on a very high trestle through a wooden flume. And then worked its way into Black Copper Canyon, still high on the ridge now. Came out of Black Copper, turned back in. This is 4th of July Canyon. Turned back in 4th of July. Came back out around the ridge and then back in at Foster Park. Back around the ridge and then reached the top of the ridge at the top of the old Red River Pass. And at this point, it headed downward into the Merino Valley. At this point, it had dropped about 200 feet from its origin. In the Merino Valley, the ditch wound way around the north end, very circuitous route. Then it came back down on the east side and ended up on the slopes of Baldy, directly across from Elizabethtown. It ended at what was called Humbug Gulch. Now, I've only outlined the part of the ditch that's in the Red River watershed. That's the only part I know anything about and the only part that I have been interested in. The remainder of the ditch is all on private land, the Two Eagles Ranch and the East Merino Ranch. so it's not accessible. But all of this, which is more than 15 miles of the ditch, is located in the Red River watershed, or what that means, it's in the Carson National Forest, so it's accessible to anyone. In order to increase the water flow, they dammed up 3 of the high mountain lakes. What they call Reservoir Number 1 is what we call Horseshoe Lake today. In those days it was called Snowbound Lake. And they raised the dam 12 feet. Reservoir Number 2 was what we know as Lost Lake. In those days it was called Great Heart Lake. And they raised it 16 feet. And then Middle Fork Lake, in those days was called Pearl Lake, and it was raised 12 feet. They had planned a 4th reservoir in Sawmill Creek, but for some reason it was never constructed. The construction began, as I say, on May the 12th. We don't have there are not a lot of records available about the actual construction, but we do know some things. The man in charge was Davis, Captain Davis. He was the superintendent, and the headquarters for the ditch construction was at Ditch Cabin, which is located right about the end of these black dots. Actually, it was on Sawmill Creek, right here. That was Ditch Cabin, headquarters. Several buildings were constructed. A sawmill was put in place. It was water powered with a water wheel. That's where Sawmill Creek gets its name. This served as headquarters. Now, in those days, you have to remember, there was no town of Red River. No one was living in the valley. There were no roads. So everyone had to come over from Elizabethtown, and all the supplies had to come over from Elizabethtown. Now, on this map, Elizabethtown would be way down about here. And what was done, they constructed the road up Hematite Creek, and it came in here at 4th of July. And then they built the road down 4th of July Canyon, probably the same route that the Jeep Road goes today. It came down 4th of July, and then the road turned south and went up the East Fork to Ditch Cabin. I'm going to stop the slides for a while. You turn the lights back on. The workforce, as far as numbers are concerned, varied, but averaged about 400 men. And almost all of these men came from Elizabethtown. They were miners who were unable to work their claims or for some reason or another wanted to work on the ditch. It probably was very fortuitous because these men were experts at this kind of construction. The ditch was built in the Red River watershed. It runs between about 10,000 and 9,000 feet, built high on the mountainside, by hand. Picks, shovels, dynamite, mules, and horses. By the end of the first year, 1868, beginning in May, by November they'd completed 80% of the project. The ditch itself was over 41 miles long. As the old records indicate, it was 41 miles and 11 chains. Chain is 60 feet. So it was 41 miles, 660 feet. There were over 3 miles of wooden flumes. They had to put in wooden flumes wherever the ditch crossed a ravine. These flumes were on trestles, some of them 20, 30, 40 feet in the air. They also had to use flumes, they call them side flumes, wherever the ditch went around a rock outcropping or a rock cliff, and they were unable to dig or to dynamite clearly a passage, they built these wooden flumes. And some of these flumes were quite long. The ditch, the construction called for this kind of construction. This would be the hillside, this is the dike, this is the ditch. At the top of the ditch, it was to be 7 feet here, and at the bottom 4 feet. The total depth was also 4 feet, and the water level was, they planned on 2 feet. And the width of the dike was 3 feet. The wooden flumes were designed, they were built out of wood, of course, and they were designed to be about 5 feet across and about 2.5 feet high. They weren't quite filled with water. At the top of the old Red River Pass, a section of iron pipe was put in, what we call today the iron flume. I'll come back to this in a minute. This is a very interesting and an amazing construction. It's what they call an inverted siphon. It ran for 2,000 feet, nearly half a mile, and in one place was elevated nearly 80 feet in the air. It crossed a valley up there just over the top. The ditch was begun in May of 68, and they had completed about 80% of it by November. They had to quit on account of snow. And so in 1869, they resumed work, and the ditch was completed in July of that year. And the last section, which was closed and completed, was a section at the top of a canyon. Was completed on July the 4th, 1868, at the top of a canyon that we now call 4th of July Canyon. 2 or 3 days later, the head gates were opened, and the water was started down the ditch. And it reached the Reno Valley, Humbug Gulch, on July the 9th, 1868. Now, when the water reached the Reno Valley, there was great disappointment, because the amount of water which had predicted just did not prove to be what had been planned. The ditch was constructed to deliver 7.5 million gallons per day. But the production of water on the other side was only about 20% of that, about 1.5 million gallons. That's still a lot of water. But it wasn't enough to make the company viable. The Merino Water and Mining Company had been based on the selling water to the miners. And the profit from that was to repay the stockholders their investment and also give them some profit. And this amount of water was simply not enough. Now, what had happened to the water was seepage, all of which occurred in the Merino Valley. There was no water loss in the Red River watershed, and that's because of the rock base. But in the Merino Valley, the soil is very fine sand, and the water simply percolated down through the bottom of this long ditch. Now, the water didn't disappear. Of course, it went into the underground reservoirs, went into seeps and springs, but it didn't help the miners any up on the side of the mountain. And so the company basically abandoned the project. Now, they continued to run some water for a few years, and then in 1875, the ditch was purchased. It's kind of a long story, but the stockholders, of course, nobody wanted responsibility for the ditch, so it went to one of the stockholders, a man named Shelby, and he kind of gave it up back to Lucian Maxwell. In 1875, Maxwell sold the ditch to Matthew Lynch. Now, Matthew Lynch, if you remember, was the man who had pioneered hydraulic mining. And he had a large claim where he did his hydraulic mining. So he purchased the ditch to use on his own claim. And he continued to operate the ditch. He had repairs put in, it was cleaned out, and he operated for 5 years. at which time he was killed. Poor Lynch, he had the misfortune of standing under a falling tree, and he killed him. And so the ditch was taken over by two of his brothers, one named James and one named Patrick. And they continued to operate the ditch for about another probably 5 years. And then they kind of abandoned the whole business. Now, and it's not clear why, whether they ran out of gold or whether they got something else came up. But they abandoned the ditch about 1885. And that's about the last time that the ditch and use it down below Cimarron for irrigation. And they made application in 1939, but that application was turned down by the state engineer on the claim that it had been such a long period of time that the ditch had been used that the water rights were no longer in effect. So the ditch has remained unused since 1885. Now today, much of the ditch remains intact. As I mentioned, there are many places where the rock slides, dirt, trees have grown in the ditch, but in many places it's in almost its original size and shape. And if you come across it, it's easy to spot. You can get up on the dike and walk the dike for miles in any direction. Now all the flumes are gone, but many of the timbers are still in place. The head gates are gone, but there are timbers of the head gates both on the east fork and on the middle fork. In one place, sometime someone built a one-room cabin in the ditch. Part of the ditch is up above Hidden Valley. Apparently some miners. What I want to do next is to show you some pictures of the ditch as it appears today. And these pictures will be in the section from along here, from Black Copper, 4th of July, Foster Park, and to the old Red River Pass. This is the way the ditch looks today. As you can see, here's the dike, and here's the ditch. The trees growing in it, but this is easy to walk. Part of this is filled in. Here's another section where there's a lot of rock. This is the ditch on this side, and this is the dike. A good many trees, but the dike is pretty well open everywhere. You can walk for long distances on it. The ditch is fairly level. There's a little bit of difference in what's stated about the engineering. Most of the ditch was planned to drop 12 feet per mile. Portions of it 4 feet per mile, but 12 feet per mile. So it's almost level. Here's the ditch down here. You can see that someone in the past has used this as a trail. This is a section that's up in the East Fork, and it's that portion was used as part of the old East Fork Trail, actually. This tree is growing in the ditch. This is pretty well filled in, quite rocky. And here's a pretty good section. This is almost the original depth. Here's the dike, a few trees in it. This is the mountainside here, but this is probably 4 feet deep, and its original width. Same thing, they are walking along the dike, and here has been a rock slide which is partially filled in the ditch as well as trees growing in it. I've got some pictures, some scenic shots taken from the ditch in this area that will give you an idea of how high up on the ridge this is. It's up nearly 10,000 feet. This is a shot taken up above, between Black Copper and 4th of July canyons, looking toward Tweeter Peak, and you can see those homes in the upper valley. This is taken kind of across from Foster Park, or really the 4th of July. That's Gold Hill. And this is the Goose Creek Canyon coming down. And here is a section close to, not far from Foster Park. You can see the town of Red River. And then this last picture is close to the old Red River Pass Road. In fact, you can see this is a section of the road, this is a section of the road, and this is a section of the road. Town of Red River in the bottom. So this is quite high on the ridge, and it's very steep. And you really wonder how those guys were able to do any kind of construction on that mountain pitch. These most all the pitches are much more than 45 degrees. Now, the next thing I want to show you is one short section. I'm going to take this section here at the very end, from Foster Park to the top of the old Red River Pass. And I'll show you kind of a crude map of just that section. And here it is. Now, let me orient you. This is the old Red River Pass Road. If you take that road to the very end, it comes to the fence. That was the fence of the West Merino Ranch, now the Two Eagles Ranch. And at that point, a road leads north, which goes up to the cross-country ski area. Also, actually goes to a Bobcat Pass. And the road going south is a Jeep road, which winds around and eventually goes to 4th of July Canyon. If you stop and park your car here and look over the fence, about 5 feet over the fence, you can see the ditch, because it came right here to the fence and then turned off and went down in the Merino Canyon. This is the actual top of the ridge. If you take this road, it leaves the fence. This is a knoll, kind of a hill. The Jeep road goes around this way, and the ditch went around the other side of it. But in less than half a mile, the road comes back into the ditch at the fence. And you can look across the fence, and you can see the ditch as it goes into the Two Eagles Ranch property. At this point, the road is actually built into the ditch. There are going to be sections along here where the ditch was used as a road bed for Jeep roads. They just bulldozed a portion of the ditch, made a good road bed. The Jeep road that runs through Foster Park is built in the bed of the ditch. And if you just look off to the east side, you can see remnants of the ditch right next to the road. Anyway, at this point was a flume, about a 600-foot flume. It's a ledge on the mountainside, and when they built the road, I don't know when that was, some of you probably know, this was a flume, and what they did was kind of widen this ledge and just pushed all of the remnants of the flume, the timbers off the side. And there's a steep rock slide. I'll show you what that looks like. This is that section. You can see that this was a rock cliff. This is a steep rock slide going down this side. And the flume was built right along in here. Some of the timbers are still present, and this is probably one. These were some big 2x10 and 4x10 timbers, mill timbers. The Jeep road turns to the left, coming down this way. And at that point, the ditch goes out around the ridge. And when the road turns and goes uphill, you can always tell when you're on the ditch. It's level. This is the only portion of that whole road that's level. The Jeep road turns and goes uphill, and you can see the ditch out on your right-hand side, and you can pick it up, follow it, and you can walk along it. At this point, it's a pretty precarious place to walk around, but the ditch comes back in, joins the Jeep road in Foster Park, and is actually, the Jeep road is built in the ditch. Now, I want to tell you about I gotta have the lights. I want to tell you, at the top of the old Red River Pass, they put in a section of iron pipe, which was called the Iron Flume. We call it the Iron Flume. And it had to cross a valley. I'm going to try, I'm not very good at this, but I'm going to try and show you what this thing kind of looked like. The ditch came along, and then the land kind of dropped down, leveled up a little bit, and went kind of like that. So at this point, they started the iron pipe, and they put it kind of went this way, and they put it on a trestle. The trestle was about 10 to 15 feet in the air. And then it actually got down to ground level. And then at this point, the pipe, this is why it's called inverted sight, but the pipe turned straight up in the air for about 70 feet and emptied into a wooden flume, which was built high up on a trestle. Now, the iron flume, of course, all the wood is gone, and the trestles have all fallen. But the pipe is still up there. I'm going to show you some pictures of the pipe. The reason I'm going into this is I don't have a slide showing the iron flume, but I have a picture of the iron flume, which was made in 1896 by a man named Altman, who was probably the first photographer to come into this area. He was a photographer out of Trinidad. And for those that are interested, the Altman studio is still in Trinidad, Colorado. He took a picture of the iron flume. It's an imposing structure. And if you look at the picture, he took it from this direction, looking, this would be west. And actually, what's due west of that is Gold Hill. So you can see along up the flume, you can see this high wooden structure, the iron pipe that turns down to the ground, and then is built on trestles here. Now, I want to show you some, now we get the lights, I'm going to show you some pictures of the pipe. If you want to see the pipe, go to the end of the old pass road, turn north, and then turn back to the right. That's the Forest Service road that goes to Bobcat Pass. And as you drive down there, the road actually goes between two fences. The McShann property is on your left, and the Two Eagles Ranch is on your right, and the pipe is about 20 feet inside the Two Eagles Ranch fence. This is a crew from Quest Ranger Station standing in front of the pipe. Here's a couple of sections. You can see here how this was bolted together. This section is a little up in the air. In a few places, there's still part of the wooden trestles there. These were put up on big, heavy timbers. And you can see this section, you can see most of the pipe going all the way through. Now, I've got one more picture to show you. This picture was taken at the Elizabethtown Cemetery. Some of you I know have been over there and familiar with it. This was taken from the Elizabethtown Cemetery looking to Baldy Mountain. Elizabethtown is back to your right. This is the road that goes over the Bobcat Pass to Eagle Nest. And today, right in this area is a big gravel pit that they're digging. They're digging those gravel pits just like those guys mined the sand and gravel 130 years ago. They mined the same gravel. In fact, there's probably lots of gold in that stuff. But I wanted to show you that the ditch wound up on the west side of Baldy at about this level, halfway up the side. Now I'm not certain. Somebody can tell me. Bob Lucian could probably tell me. It ended at Humbug Gulch, and I don't know whether it's this gulch or that gulch. But anyway, that's where the ditch ended. Now, I will stop at this point. I have some pictures, if you're interested. I have a picture of the iron flume. I have a picture of a wooden flume. It's not the one that was on the ditch, but it is a wooden flume. I have a picture of Elizabethtown in the late 1890s. And I have a picture of showing you how the hydraulic mining worked. And if you look in that picture, they're using a hose up on the side of the gulch. And there's a man standing by the hose in a top hat. And everyone claims, or at least says, that they think that's Matthew Lynch. Don't know for sure. Then I have some recent photographs that black and white that were made on the ditch and showing some of the timbers and sort of what the ditch looked like. Now, I've talked enough. I'm going to answer any question. I'm not sure I can answer, but I'll try.
Tell us a little bit more about this inverted flume. I mean, this inverted cycle you've got there.
Well, see the... Yeah, he wanted to know about the inverted flume. Well, now, you need to talk to some of these guys that are engineers.
Down forces down.
Well, you see, as long as if you got a pipe here, as long as this point is lower than this point, the water's going to flow back up to here. And then they dumped it into the wooden flume. So you can really drop it down. I'm sure there's some limit, but it's like in a hose, water hose. You know, the hose can go down, it don't come back up. As long as you don't have it higher than its point of origin. That's what that was about.
Bush, you're...
Absolutely. Royce is my sort of authority. Do you remember, we measured the size of that pipe. Do you remember the diameter of that pipe? And those sections were about 8 feet long. And that thing had been repaired a good bit because they put bands over it and bolted them on. So the thing, we know it was worked for 10 or 15 years.
Rush, I might say one thing, that canyon you're talking about right there is known as Bake Oven Canyon because they had ovens in there where they baked the bread for the workers, and they named it Bake Oven Canyon.
You know,
Repeat that, right?
Yeah. Bob Prunty says that this valley up there, incidentally, you need to go up there in the early spring. That thing is covered with iris usually. And then later on, it's covered with columbine. He says this is called Bake Oven
Canyon.
Bake Oven Canyon because that's where they had the ovens to produce the bread. The thing, I just do not understand how they did the logistics on this thing. To feed 400 men with everything having to come out of Elizabethtown by a long wagon road, it's a mystery to me. Okay, thank you for coming.
We appreciate everyone coming out tonight. We do have a few cookies. Like I said, we didn't expect this large of a crowd. Your presentation was very informative. Thank you very much. We will be doing another on August 9th here at the Community House, and Rush will be speaking on the Black Copper Mine. So you might, in fact...
Yeah, well, let me just tell you I'll be back next month to talk about the Black Copper Mine. The only reason I picked that out, the Black Copper Mine, we've been trying to get the Black Copper Mine on the National Register, and it's already been approved for the state of New Mexico historical group, and it should be on the National Register pretty quick. The Black Copper Mine contains, as far as everybody knows, the only remaining stamp mill in New Mexico, and one of the few in the United States. So I'll talk about that next time.
So we hope everyone will come out for that. And thank you for coming.